We believe life can be a journey toward wholeness, toward reconnecting with who we are authentically meant to be. We walk this path of growth and discovery with our children, with our partners, within ourselves. These are the stories of what's possible. These are the conversations that light the way. Welcome to Soul Path Parenting. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Amy.
I'm excited. We're here to talk about anger and passion today.
Yes, I am super excited too. I love anger.
That is a perfect statement to begin with, because I wanted to start out by sharing something about myself, which is that I have a lifelong, what I would say, I've had a struggle with anger and gaining awareness and some ever increasing level of self-mastery with anger has been a part of my journey. And I came to you some months ago with this notion of myself as a fire-breathing dragon who, I don't get angry a lot, y'all, but when I do, sometimes I breathe fire. And it doesn't feel good to the people who are getting scorched. And it honestly doesn't feel good to me afterwards either. And I said to you, Lauren, I just want to be this majestic dragon flying in the sky who never breathes fire. And you were like, no. So I'd love to begin there because you actually have helped me to start to transform even how I think about anger. And I so wanted to just snuff it out, all of it, and be done. How do you think about anger?
I love this question, and I love you, Amy, and I love how you approach these things and how real you are and how alive these things are that we're talking about, because that's how I like to function now. It's very alive and real.
Yeah.
And when we had that conversation, when you were asking me about that, I love how beautifully and articulately, and I love your metaphor and the dragon. And the essence of your question is a very common one that I see frequently, which is, how do I get rid of the anger? How do I get rid of it? Because when I get angry, I, in your case, breathe fire. And then I don't feel good about it. The people that got scorched, they don't seem to like it. How do I get rid of the fire? How do I get rid of the anger? And my response is always some version of, let's disentangle some things, because I don't advise getting rid of the fire, getting rid of the anger. I probably said something to you like, no, we want the fire, keep the fire. You can build skills around how you wield that fire, how you breathe it, when you breathe it, where you breathe it. That can be worked with and worked on. But eliminating that fire to me feels equivalent to, how do I be half human? How do I be less alive? How do I mute myself so that I never hurt people? And maybe that's
Yeah.
part of, because that's a good thing to bring into this. A lot of us, we don't want to hurt people with our fire. And so sometimes and I'm speaking about myself now here. I've scorched some people that I love, and my goal wasn't to scorch them. I didn't go into that experience going, you know what? It's time to burn these people. That wasn't my
Right?
intention, right? But I've been there so many times. And that's part of it too, is I'm like, no, our fire collectively. I am a dragon as well. The fire isn't bad. Sometimes we wield that fire in ways that co-create more pain than necessary.
Yeah.
And I think this is a really important thing to try to tease apart and disentangle things. That's what I love to do with people. Sometimes the truth hurts. And Callie is one of my favorite goddesses. So, Kali is a Hindu goddess of truth, and she's a warrior. She has a sword. She chops off demons' heads. She'll just chop them off one after another. And metaphorically, the demons represent illusions. Kali ruthlessly murders illusions for the well being of all. Kali is sometimes described as the mother of earth, as the mother of all that is, as
Mm.
the source of truth and life. And she's sometimes portrayed as a fire breathing dragon, as a sword wielding warrior who just chops demons' heads off one after another. And she's like holding a head and a sword and some pictures of her. And she's so loving. She's so loving. And she wants what's best for everyone. And seeing the truth clearly, I believe, is the best thing for everyone. And sometimes that gets conflated with things that we're taught to think are bad. So if we are standing up for something that's true and people feel hurt by that or insulted or judged by us, and then we feel bad because we feel like we hurt them, we can ask ourselves, did I stand up for what is true in a way that was necessary, or was I guilty of some scorching that was unnecessary and that co-creates more pain than necessary? And to try to give some concrete examples to share what I'm talking about. Let's say that I am feeling frustrated or angry with my husband because we have divided up the chores, and one of his chores is to empty the trash cans throughout the house, and they're regularly overflowing, and I don't want to do his chore. I want them emptied. Like, I'm frustrated. And the truth is, there's an important truth here that needs to be brought to light. We split up the chores. We agreed on this. You're supposed to empty the trash cans. You're not emptying them on the schedule that I feel comfortable with. I don't like
Mm.
stacking things on top of the trash. And then when they tumble over, sometimes I'm like, "Oh, forget it. I'll just take the damn trash out myself right now." And if I am feeling angry about that, I have choices in how I speak to my husband. So there's a past version of me that would have gotten angry. Excuse me, I'm choking. Angry about these overflowing trash cans for like weeks before I even choose to bring it to his attention. And by that time, I've stockpiled enough rationalized justification to say things in a way that I'm going to regret later. And by the time I bring it up, because, the trash is toppling over, and I'm finally like, you know what? Also, by the way, I've had about enough of this. And guess what? You've been doing wrong for weeks and blah, 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 blah. And, I did this and I did that. And it's like, I've got this arsenal of weapons now that I'm like hurling at my unsuspecting husband, who apparently has a really high tolerance for stacking tumbling trash and, doesn't, this is all out of the blue for him. And by the way, disclaimer, because honey, I know you listen to this. It could be me that I was supposed to take out the trash and my husband that was the one who was frustrated. These roles are totally reversible. This is not a true story about my marriage. My husband's actually better at taking the trash out than me. But this is a great way to illustrate. I just have to say that because when my husband's listening to this, he's going to be like, "What is she talking about?" I'm just making up examples, honey. You know how I do that. So anyway, but let's go back to this example. I actually think this example came from a client because I'm like, I actually know people who this was their story. Anyway, if at that point, when I bring it up to him, I'm hurling things, and I've done this with other things, not trash, but other things, and I'm weaponizing my words and I'm judging him and I'm blah, 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 I'm causing so much unnecessary suffering. And it doesn't have to be done that way. If, on the other hand, as soon as it bothers me, I check in with myself and I say, okay, how do I want to handle this? Do I want to say something? Do I want to just start doing it myself? Do I want to switch chores? I can invite my husband into a compassionate conversation where I say, hey, we divided up the chores, a couple weeks ago, and this has been happening with the trash, and I don't like it. And I'm kind of thinking, maybe we switch up. Maybe I take the trash since your tolerance for trash seems different than mine, and yours isn't working for me. Or are you willing to adjust? Or whatever the case may be, it can be an open negotiation where I bring what I want and need, what I care about. I'm bringing the truth, but I'm bringing it in a way that's empathetic and compassionate, not blaming or judging or doing things that we often do in anger that are illusions. I mean, those that that form of fire breathing. So maybe I should amend what I said to you, because if that's the type of fire you're breathing, those are illusion fires and we can cut their heads off and get rid of those. But the essence of the fire as the life energy, the part of me that tells me what is okay with me and what is not, what I like and what I don't, what I need, that we don't want to kill that. So I hope this is disentangling some
Yeah.
things.
I think one of the most important tools that we can talk about, and maybe we'll save tools for a little bit later in the conversation, but I just want to also mention at this point in the conversation, because you're reminding me about an argument that I had with my husband, I don't know, a couple months ago. And I had
Mm-hmm.
none of that awareness in the moment. I was just angry. And
Mm-hmm.
underneath that anger, I couldn't quite see yet. So, one of the things that you and I have learned and have talked about, and I wanted to share this with our listeners, is that anger has been said to be a secondary emotion. And so it usually sits on top of something that we have to dig a level deeper to see. And I was just thinking about it before the show, the things that it usually is hiding or sort of
Mm-hmm.
bubbling to the surface. What's underneath it for me is usually one of three things. It could be injustice, which in Permission to Feel, the book that we've referenced in this series by Dr. Mark Brackett, um, he talks about anger as relating to injustice or some kind of unfairness. And that is sometimes the case for me. There's also oftentimes I am experiencing a lack of control and I do not like it.
Mm-hmm.
It could
Mm-hmm.
be that. And that's why I'm becoming very escalated. Or thirdly, for me, most frequently when I experience anger, what's underneath it could be sadness. And we've talked about how anger is this we have this kind of four box that we've been playing with, this grid or chart, if you will, that we introduced in the previous episode, the episode on joy and sadness. But I'm going to really quickly kind of ground us on where we are because it's going to help orient why I would go to anger rather than sadness. If you can imagine that all feelings are on the sort of, let's see, left, right, sort of the horizontal axis, some level of pleasantness. So low on the left, and then they increase to the right as pleasantness goes up. And then low to high energy. So that's the up down axis. Um, that would be the vertical axis. And so you have low energy and high energy. In the bottom left corner, you would have this blue quadrant where sadness resides. That's low
Mm-hmm.
energy and low pleasantness. And above that, where you have low pleasantness but high energy, you have anger. And I am a person who prefers not to go into sadness, as we've talked about. So I would just much rather go to anger and not even look at the sadness that resides beneath it. And so in this episode where I was angry with my husband a couple months ago, I was upon reflection, realized it was actually the sadness that I didn't want to look at, and probably some amount of exhaustion and loneliness. There were a whole bunch of things intertwined. But first, I went to being very, upset with him. This related to, I think, just a feeling of doing more than what I wanted to do in terms of heavy lifting of one-on-one childcare. I wanted company. It was on the weekend, and so one of the things that I think can be really helpful as a tool that I did not practice in that moment with my husband was to actually sense into the feelings of anger, because there's a physical sensation, and then
Mhm.
create a pause before the so that we can respond rather than react. For me, that skill alone, which is something I'm still very much working on, is there's we're going to talk about other tools, but that's the first and foremost. For me, that's the most important one that I'm continuing to work on to get to increased levels of mastery, which some days I'm really good at it, y'all, and some days it's like kindergarten, anger kindergarten here. It's like, yeah. So, do you want to talk about the feelings blueprint, because we start to unpack some of these somatic elements? Okay. So you
Yeah.
guys listening, we have a downloadable on our website, which is soulpathparenting.com. And under bonus content, you will see a feelings blueprint. And for those of you who might not have gone and gotten it to sort of work along with this series, no worries. We're just going to talk you through a couple of the buckets, and Lauren and I are going to share some of our own human experiences, which you may see yourself in, because the understanding of anger begins with unpacking our own blueprint. And
Mhm.
so the first area that we're going to talk about is somatic awareness, meaning what's happening? What does it feel like in my body when I experience blank? And in this case, when I experience, let's do anger, and then we could do
Mhm.
passion as well.
Mhm.
So, Lauren, what does it feel like in your body when you experience anger?
When I experience anger, I experience it somatically as this tightness in my chest and abdomen, this pressure. So the inside of my body starts feeling super pressurized and tight and uncomfortable. So very low pleasantness. And I feel very agitated. My energy goes up, my heart rate goes up, and I want to do something as fast as possible to release. It's like releasing steam on a boiling pot sensation. Um, I don't like it. I don't want it. I want to release it. And if I'm not careful and I react rather than pausing and being with the feelings and doing other things that we're going to recommend, the way I release it can be experienced by the people around me as me scorching them with my fiery dragon breath. So, yeah, but the sensations for me are tightness, intensity, pressure that feels bad.
I love the pressure cooker analogy because
Mm-hmm.
I really relate to that. And I have similar somatic experiences of anger. I notice my heart starts racing, and I definitely also find that I'm breathing shorter, more shallow breaths. Um, I feel contracted as well. And then once the pressure valve releases, there's going to be some volume.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, before we step into the next part of the blueprint, we're kind of weaving this conversation together based on our curiosity. Rather than yelling, which is oftentimes the release valve for a lot of us, a lot of people, before we start to bring consciousness and awareness to the experience of being angry, it just almost the time frame can be so shortened that we can feel the anger in our body and have words coming out of our mouth and anger emanating out of our body all in a very short amount of time. Have you found other ways, as you really talk about slowing things down as a part of the mastery?
Mhm.
And then what is your release valve now?
That's a great question. Yeah. So slowing things down has been so helpful to me. And the way I would describe my process would be I used to experience what you just described. It was like a hair trigger, split second, and I would release through primarily yelling, and it wouldn't even work the way that I wanted it to. I didn't feel better after I yelled. I didn't feel calm. I didn't feel calm. It didn't restore me to equilibrium. It may have released some of that pressure, but I felt hijacked. I felt out of control. I kind of felt like a boiling pot whose lid flew off. And then once I would eventually calm down, which took a while, then the guilt would flood in
Mm,
because
mhm.
that, and I've learned so much too to transform anytime I find myself tiptoeing back into like victim mindset, because there's a difference between legitimately experiencing something in which you are victimized in the moment, which I have experienced those. So I'm not, you know, there's a both and here for sure when it comes to victim and victimhood for me. I'm not saying that people are never victims, because I've been a victim. And I'm also very aware that I have a choice when I'm choosing a victim mindset. And so when that boiling pot used to, the lid would fly off, this is how I was experiencing it. And this is sometimes connected to how, like, the victim mentality. It happened to me. The lid would fly off and I would yell at one of my children. And then I would want to blame them. Well, if they didn't trigger me, if they just put their shoes on faster so we weren't late. So this is a true one, my poor sweet children. I think I've mentioned this before. I used to really struggle with being late. I had this real issue. This is me. This is straight up my real life. I would panic over being late. And toddlers, preschoolers, they don't have the same sense of urgency. They have trouble with their shoes. And so when I would get angry and panicked and not want to be late and yell and stuff like that, and it felt like it was happening to me. If they just put their shoes on faster, if this, if that. And then in my transformative work, I learned to empower myself by taking ownership and responsibility for me. And so my process of slowing down, before I was able to slow down, phase one for me was just paying attention without changing anything. So I started intentionally paying attention to
Mm.
how I experienced feeling triggered, feeling angry, you know, venting, and the aftermath. I started paying attention to it. And I paid enough attention enough times to really see clearly how much it wasn't serving me or anyone else. And I feel like I paid attention enough times to gain the ability to slow it down and make different choices. That's how I experienced it. It's not like one day I woke up and decided that I was going to start making different choices and that worked. I did do that. I did wake up and decide, now I'm going to make different choices. And then I witnessed myself repeating the same patterns and making the same choices. And, um, and sometimes I would even then feel bad about that and feel guilty and feel like, gosh, I know better now. We talked about this in my first experience being interviewed by you, the knowing better and doing better, and the additional layer of feeling better in my body. So I would intellectually, mentally learn what was more helpful. And like, people would tell me things and teach me. I read books. I've had multiple teachers. Pause, breathe, calm your body, respond instead of react. And I would intellectually learn these ideas. And when I first tried to put them into practice, I found myself often failing. And then I would double down on judging myself and telling myself I would get it right next time. And eventually I needed to just allow what was happening to happen, witness it, like release the judgment, have self compassion. I'm trying, I'm learning. We repeat things as many times as we need to learn our lessons. And then at some point, I had witnessed enough, I had released enough judgment. Like, what it really felt like to me was the ability to pause and slow down and choose opened up for me.
Mm.
And then I started practicing that more and more and more. And so now I've paid so much attention to myself and my body. When I start to feel those sensations of anger, when I feel myself becoming triggered, I now usually feel myself becoming triggered before I'm fully triggered. And that's where the magic lives. Because once you're fully triggered, Eckhart Tolle talks about this, and I love Eckhart Tolle. His books are beautiful. He talks about how if you can maintain a shred of consciousness and you can feel things as they're coming on, you have options. But if you get fully hijacked by your pain body, that would be his language. For me, I
Mhm.
might say if I become fully triggered, fully hijacked, hooked by the trigger, where I'm fully embodying the trigger, I do experience that as a loss of control, as a loss of choice, I feel like I'm on autopilot repeating old patterns that I don't want to repeat. So my path to empowerment has included getting so aware of how I feel by paying attention to what was happening inside me and then what I externalized so many times that I feel these things coming now. I feel them coming. And that's why I'm able to pause and breathe and say to someone I love, I feel myself starting to want to get mad at you for no reason. I'm going to walk in the other room and take some deep breaths, and then I'm going to come back. And that is so much more appealing to me than getting hijacked, getting mad at them for no reason, hurting them, causing pain, and then afterwards realizing what I was really upset about or that I was hangry or whatever, and then going back and doing the apology, which I mean, still happens to me sometimes. I'm human. And so I also still get plenty of opportunities to practice the repair process, which is as important as anything else. But the amount of times I'm able to feel it coming and pause and choose, that's why I do what I do.
Yeah. I love how your journey in developing this awareness, this conscious awareness around anger, it really feels like a practice where you start out
Mhm.
with, as you said, just getting the somatic awareness so that you're starting to even being the observer of yourself, your feelings, but also this whole chain of events occurring. That's such a, I love
Mhm.
how you talk about that. That's such a powerful starting point.
Mhm.
And the hardest part to me is it seems like it would be releasing the judgment while you're in it
Mhm.
or
So hard.
afterwards. Yeah.
So hard. So many of my clients, and this was me too, I had the hardest parts for me were releasing my self judgment so that I could fully participate in this process. Because while I was still stuck judging myself, that extra layer of judgment was such an obstacle for me. So if I started to feel myself getting angry and then I'm judging myself, no, don't get angry. Stop it. Stop it. It's like trying to hold the lid down on the boiling pot. It gets more intense. And then when it flies off, it's less ideal. It's worse. I don't know. I've struggled with this language because I try to really carefully refrain from judging. So like I'll say things like less ideal instead of it's terrible, you know.
Mhm.
But if you try to hold that lid on because you're like, no, no, not allowed, not allowed, the intensity increases until the intensity of what you're trying to repress, I experienced it as it felt like it overpowered me. And so where do I get my power back? How do I become empowered in a situation like that? The way I experienced it was I'm starting to feel myself getting angry. It's okay to be angry. I know it's okay to be angry. I am allowed to breathe. I'm allowed to take care of myself. I'm allowed to pause. I'm allowed to feel this. I don't have to contain it in a repressive, suppressive way. I don't have to eradicate it. That's not even possible. Like even the being late trigger. So, not being able to be late was connected to my perfectionism. That was just one manifestation of it. You know, good, perfect people are on time. I want to be that. And giving myself permission to be late. Like I eventually transitioned what I was prioritizing. I let go of prioritizing my false perfectionistic, egoistic view of myself as an on time person, and instead decided to prioritize myself as a human, my children as humans. And we started being late to shit.
Mhm.
And that and everyone lived, including me, including my ego. My ego hasn't died yet. I don't know if that's ever going to happen for me. Like Eckhart Tolle's ego is gone. I'm like, wow, that sounds cool. My ego is still alive and well, but I have a much more conscious relationship with my ego now. So I'm like, oh yeah, hi ego. You still wish we were perfect. All right, pal. I hear ya. Instead of getting fully hijacked by it.
Oh, yeah. Perfectionism feels intertwined with anger for me too. It's funny, I just remember getting so angry in my I think in my this must have been in my early 30s. I left my computer in my bag and put it through the, um, scanner at the airport
Mm-hmm.
and was so angry, like, the guy before the guy even said anything to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's just there doing his job, and I because I just had so much attachment to doing everything right all the time,
Mhm. Mhm.
that a lot of my anger in that phase of my life came from just the gap between reality and my perfectionistic ideals that were the only way in my mind at that time that it would be okay to be.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oof,
Yeah, no, that's a great example.
that was a hard way to live.
Whew, yeah, no,
Whew.
I feel so much more free now. I am free to be late. I am free to be imperfect. I am free to slow down. I am free to feel my feelings. I feel so much freer.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful. And I want this for anyone who wants it.
Yeah.
So that's why I do the work I do.
I also do wanna say that you and I both consider ourselves recovering perfectionists. It's not
Mhm.
that is not eradicated from my life either. It's just not the prevailing operating framework anymore, but it still comes up. It was coming up for me yesterday when
Mhm.
we planned a pool party in Colorado in May, and I could have moved it to the morning like my husband suggested, but I didn't, and then of course it was cloudy and, gray during the exact 2 hours of the party
Mhm.
and sunny before and after, and I was just on it with myself. And then
Mhm.
trying to tell myself at the same time, like, you're being on it with yourself. Like, you're beating yourself up because you should have moved it, but now it is when it is. Anyways,
Right?
it was a pool full of 6-year-olds and everybody was happy. So
Mhm.
it all worked out. But yeah, I still have those voices. We'll do a whole episode on that. Back to anger,
Mhm.
and blueprints. And both of our perfectionism is interrelated with the next part of the blueprint that I would love to talk about because
Mhm.
your anger responses and my anger responses, they don't just like come from nowhere. We didn't just
Mhm.
come into a human body and decide to just have angry outbursts. There are patterns at work here.
Mhm.
And so the next part of looking at the blueprint that Lauren and I would invite you, the listener, also to consider, and we'll share a little bit from our lives, is the family pattern. And here are the questions to ask yourself. How did your childhood caregivers model experiencing and expressing anger? Think about your mom, if your mom was around, your dad, if your dad was around, um, grandparents, whoever mostly raised you. Think about how they modeled anger. And then also think about whether there was a judgment or story about it. And if there was, what that might have been. So I'm going to turn it over to you first, Lauren, to talk about
Mhm.
your family patterns.
Yeah, so I would say part of my anger blueprint included the adults that primarily raised me trying not to be angry. And then when they were unsuccessful and embodied anger, it felt out of control. It felt explosive. It felt violent. And it felt very unsafe. And it was not being contained well. And I talk a lot with people about containing things being different than repressing, or, because some people resist my language when I say it's possible to contain it. And they're like, no, I need to express it. And I'm like, oh, okay. Let me clarify. You can contain and express. You can contain what you're feeling with like boundaries that help you express in an intentional way,
Mhm.
compared to that lid blowing off, that uncontained. So what I my answer to this blueprint question would be, I experienced my caregivers embodying explosive, uncontained anger, violent, scary, unsafe anger, and alternating that with the like lulls in between of, oh, the anger's gone now, it's gone, but then we never knew when it would be back and what that would look like, and then it was gone and then it was back. And so that would be how I experienced it. And then the judgment about it, the story about it. So these words were never spoken, but a lot of times these judgment stories that live inside us were the best sense we could make of what we were experiencing at a young age. And then that story stays alive in us until we challenge it. And so at a young age, the story that I concluded based on my experiences were anger is bad, anger is wrong, anger is scary, anger is violent. It's best to never be angry. And so anytime I ever felt angry, because I absolutely think it's natural and human to feel anger. And I don't think we can avoid that and be fully human. But anytime I had that experience, I judged it, I feared it, I tried to repress it. I didn't know how to contain it in a healthy way because I hadn't learned or practiced that. And so those are the things that I would say to answer those questions.
How do you feel like your family's blueprint showed up in your way of being?
So I repeated this with my children when they were young. And when my first child, if she expressed any sort of anger, my reaction and my messaging basically communicated not okay to be angry, no being angry. We change it into something else. We distract, we whatever, but I wasn't comfortable or practiced being in the presence of anger, mine or anyone else's. So I had tried to reject and suppress mine, and then I expected my children to do the same. And my first child mostly early on complied. And then my second child was defiant and embodied anger and like hitting, kicking, screaming. And I mean, he was a toddler. He was the sweetest, amazingest little toddler who also had this fire in him that he wasn't going to repress. And what my early parenting included was when my initial attempts to get him to stop and to contain his feelings didn't work, and I wasn't doing it in a healthy way because I didn't know how to do that yet. I was in an unhealthy way trying to get him to stop it. When that didn't work, I would start reacting in ways that were as bad, if not worse, than what he was doing.
Mhm.
And that was part of what set me on the path to conscious parenting and to all the transformative work that I now do, because I realized I was reenacting anger's not okay, because it's either expressed in inappropriate, hurtful, violent ways, or we just don't express it. So everybody get on the same page, follow the contract or the script. When that didn't happen, I then had the opportunity to learn how to be with my anger so that I could be with his anger, so that I could eventually invite my daughter's anger into our family. And now we are all much more fluent in anger, which is a much different experience. I'm not afraid of anger anymore.
Mhm.
I'm not afraid of my children's reactions to things. I'm so much less afraid of my reactions. I like how you keep saying, it's a work in progress, because it is. Earlier, I said I feel much freer. I don't feel completely free. I get hooked and triggered sometimes still, but I feel so much freer. I feel so much less afraid of my reactions and unafraid of my children's reactions, which is different than how I started out.
I would love to dive into this dimension of how we can hold space for our children's anger. And I want to share the last part of the blueprint
Mm-hmm.
questions because that
Mm-hmm.
I told you before we started recording, I had a new aha, even just doing our own worksheet.
I'm so excited. And you kept it a surprise. I'm ready to be
Surprise!
surprised.
Yeah. So the last question here, and our listeners can also ask yourself this: how did your childhood caregivers react to you when you expressed anger as a child? And Lauren, you already shared a little bit about that, but all of a sudden, reading this question written this way and thinking about it again, I realized that so when I was growing up, discipline, I was probably only spanked 2 or 3 times. Discipline, but I mean, I was hit by my father a few times. I mean, this was the '80s, so not to excuse it, but it was a different era. Um, well, I mean, people even in any case, spanking. It's a thing that happens. But most of the time, I would be sent to my room. And I'm realizing now that I think most of the time when I was sent to my room, I was angry
Mm-hmm.
because one of two things. Either I was fighting with my sister. So there was either some sibling, conflict happening, and the
Mm-hmm.
resolution of it was go to your rooms, or I was angry with my parents. I was an
Mm-hmm.
extremely compliant child because the stakes for me were just too high. I was like, we gotta behave because we could lose love, and that's not gonna. I mean, obviously, all of that was on a subconscious level, but I've I've unpacked it, and now I see the compromises I was making in order to, be compliant in order to get the love. But I am sure I had my moments. And so, yeah, doing this blueprint assessment, I realized that my one of my major associations with anger is being essentially sent away.
Mm-hmm.
You are no longer acceptable to
Mm-hmm.
be in our presence.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would just love to go back to what you were just saying about how you've now created in your family this ability to enable your kids to even express anger and hold space for that anger. And could you just talk about what that looks like and how that shows up in your family, because that is such a powerful shift in parenting versus I think the mainstream.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I had those types of experiences too from a parenting perspective. So with my son, like I said, when he was young and I was still struggling and I hadn't learned what I then learned and practiced what I then practiced, I spanked him, which we've talked about in other episodes. And I also attempted timeout. I also put him in his room with the, idea of like, you can come back out when you are behaving differently. And all of that, unfortunately, and we've learned so much now, and there's so much research out there and information out there to help, and there's the shift from time out to time in that a lot of people are aware of now and are practicing that.
Can you
Because
say more about what that
yeah,
means?
I'll say more about that, because what we've learned about brain development, so we've studied it enough and it's been published and it's becoming more accessible Dan Siegel, The Whole Brain Child, lots of other resources as well. What we've learned about brain development is, spanking toddlers when they're misbehaving isn't helpful, it's hurtful. Putting them in timeout is also not helpful, it's hurtful, because it sends the message, you may not embody this around me. You must get rid of this. The price of connection is you remove this from yourself. And so I did that too. I did all the things. Part of why my clients love me is there's nothing they can come to me with like, oh, I did this. I'm like, I did that too. I did that too. I did all those things.
Yeah. Can I also interject? We used to do timeouts. So I just don't want to be perceived to be implying that we never did timeouts either, because earlier in my parenting journey, we did. Like that
Well,
was the
and
tool
timeouts
that
were
I that's
right.
what I thought I was
That was
supposed
the
to do.
tool that was the tool we were offered to replace spanking. It was supposed to, because like timeline wise, it used to be that almost everyone spanked. I don't want to say everyone because there's always exceptions, but spanking was the norm. And then there was the realization that that was harmful. And for a while, it was replaced with timeout, where, and it was marketed as you give the child time and space to settle down, you take time and space. And also, another thing that I think is valuable to bring into this discussion is the old like cliche statement, spare the rod, spoil the child. So that was connected to like the idea that we had to spank kids, that not spanking them was like neglecting them. Okay. So then it transitions to timeouts, and the marketing was they need this time to settle down. And if you stay in their presence, you're rewarding this bad behavior and reinforcing it. And so, in the same way that way back when it was, if your kid's bad, quote, and you don't spank them, you're failing to parent them appropriately. Then it was like, whoa, whoops, spanking's bad. Just like they used to think fat was bad for us. And now we're like, wait, we need healthy fats. Everybody's having
Yeah.
issues because healthy fats are missing from their diets. So then it was, timeout is essential, and you're like a bad parent if you don't do it, if you're too weak to do it. Well, that was all super flawed as well. What we now understand about brain development and mirror neurons and the importance of modeling, if you put a toddler in a timeout in their room with the door shut, nothing is being modeled for them. They are learning nothing. They are panicking because they've been separated from who they're dependent on. And it's really not helpful at all. So the newest thing I'm aware of is time in, where if there's a struggle happening, if there's behaviors that are problematic, you stay present with the child, especially when they're young. I think some of the ages that are suggested are like 7 and younger, especially. If a teenager is being grumpy and they want to go to their room, that's different. I have an almost 14-year-old who will sometimes want a break from me and say, I'm going to my room, don't follow me, leave me alone. And I respect that, if she's choosing that. But 7 and younger, their brains are developing. They need modeling. And another phrase I love that I think I've shared before is, a dysregulated adult cannot help regulate a dysregulated child. And so taking this back to my experience of transforming anger in myself first, in order to become the kind of mother who could guide my children toward healthy expression of anger, I first had to become a human who could feel it, contain it, and express it in a healthy way. I had to be able to embody and model what I wanted to teach. So that was a process for me.
Mm-hmm.
And as I transformed myself, my children started transforming just from witnessing me and being in my presence. And then I got to the point where I could intentionally guide them and help them in ways that are even, more more skilled than when I was first on this journey myself. So that has been part of it. But so now that I am able to regulate myself in response to my own anger and or anyone else's anger, I'm a useful person to have around when there's anger, because I can regulate myself, and then we're always co-regulating off of each other. This isn't something that we try to do. It's automatic. It's like breathing. So, in the same way that if you walk into a room, you can feel or sense the tension or the relaxation in that atmosphere. If you walk into a room right after people were arguing, you can sense it. You can feel the tension. If you walk into a room full of regulated, calm people, you can feel that. You're like, oh, I want to stay in this room. I
Mhm.
like this room. And whatever state you came in with, you are influenced by the what your environment is containing. So, yeah. So in my family, I mean, my children will come to me when they're angry. Now they'll share things with me. They'll even like thank me for not overreacting like I used to, because it's easier for them to talk to me and share things with me, and I'm able to stay calm and present and listen, which is really great. But the process. So, what does it look like in my family? Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I can describe is what it used to look like when I panicked, when I reacted, when my heart rate went up, when I became triggered, and then the dominoes fell from there. And so, the difference now is I regulate myself, and then I'm available to hold space for and help and guide and offer the opportunity to co regulate with my children. And sometimes they want that, and sometimes they're not ready for it. Like, I don't know if you've ever experienced this with another human. It could be a child, it could be an adult. I've occasionally had a child come to me angry, and I'm just empathizing. I'm like, I hear you. That sounds hard. And they're like, I don't want your empathy right now. Like they're just mad. And if the other person gets hooked by that or triggered by that, or if that catalyzes in me something like, well, I was just trying to help you, but since you don't want my help, since that didn't work, now I'm going to be angry back at you, then it escalates. But if instead I have empathy for that too, yeah, sometimes I don't want empathy either. I hear you. And then if they're like, oh, more empathy, and they walk away because they don't want that right now, that's fine. I'm still there. I'm still available for when they're ready. And I'm honoring their process, and I'm honoring their choice and their autonomy. And I mean, we have boundaries. So the first practical boundary we put in place way back when, that was a boundary for me, was no harming other people's bodies. Like, I committed to no longer spanking and to no longer harming anyone's body. And I committed to doing everything in my power to maintain an environment where no one's bodies were being harmed. So if my children started fighting with each other, if I needed to physically separate them and hold them, I tried to do it without causing any harm to anyone's body. That was my commitment. And,
Mhm.
we had some experiences like that. But once I committed to no more harm of bodies, I embodied it. I maintained it. I lived up to it as best as I could in every situation possible. And that became our new normal eventually. And now we don't harm each other's bodies. Like, that became how it was. And then the next thing was words. So once we stopped harming bodies, then all we were left with was the ability to weaponize our words. And so then the next commitment was no weaponized words. Speak your truth, speak it authentically without weaponizing words. And I learned how to do it, and I modeled it, and I required it, and we practiced it. I read Nonviolent Communication, which is a great book. I forget the author's names in this moment, but Nonviolent Communication is helpful because it just gives examples for how to speak what you need to speak and what's true without weaponizing your words. And we were talking about that earlier, because anger is often expressed as weaponized words.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it was just these commitments and these practices. And I recognized that I couldn't ask my children to do anything that I wasn't consistently doing. And Dr. Shafali talks about that with us coaches. If parents are trying to get their children to change a behavior, the first question is, what is your embodiment quotient of that behavior, of that goal? Are you embodying that a majority of the time? Are you modeling it? Because if you're not, then you can't authentically and in alignment and with empathy hold that boundary for your children. So, yeah, I would say that's a pretty good description of what we went through.
Going back to the early days of making this transition or transformation, I should say, in your way of having awareness of anger and transforming how you expressed it, how important was meditation? Did it play a role at all?
For me, it did. So, my experience with meditation, I think the greatest benefit that meditation offered me was an opportunity to give myself my full attention. So, the meditation practice that I committed to was a minimum of 10 minutes a day in which I gave myself my full attention. My interiority had my full attention, and I was willing to witness and hold in compassion anything and everything that was there. And I had so much resistance to trying this. It was my intention to start this practice for a solid 3 years before I actually started it. It was probably about 3 years of me being like, I'm really going to start doing that. I'm going to try that. I'm going to start doing that. It took me that long. And once I finally started, I didn't like some of what I was finding in there. And, the judgment, like I knew I was going to judge it. I didn't even want to see it because if I saw it, then I was going to judge it more harshly than if I can't even see it. I mean, I'm still judging it subconsciously, right? So, and I think that's part of the reason why I needed to do something super simple. There's all different versions of meditation, and I recommend that people experiment with versions of meditation and find what works best for them. For me, I needed it to be that simple and actually even more specific. So my goal was 10 minutes, but I gave myself the flexibility of literally anywhere from 1 minute to 10 minutes. So like 1 minute was better than no minutes. 3 minutes was cool. 5 minutes was great. 10 minutes was the goal. And if I woke up on a particular morning and I was like, I can't 10 minutes today. No way. What can I do? Can I do 3? Like I would set the timer for whatever I was willing to set the timer for that day. But my commitment was every morning before I do anything else, I give myself my full attention for 1 to 10 minutes. The goal is 10. And I hold with compassion whatever is there. Like I see it as fully as I can and I seek to understand it and welcome it rather than judge it and reject it.
So you weren't trying to sort of create space and release thoughts and let them go. You were actually allowing thoughts.
Yes. So some people talk about the goal of being without thoughts for a period of time. That wasn't how I practiced. My version was giving myself my full attention and being with whatever that was. So there was no like impetus to let it go. There was no, it would be better if I wasn't thinking anything. There was none of that for me. It was all about cultivating self-compassion. And I would say after 1 to 2 years of actually practicing this was probably when I finally was able to forgive myself for every wrong, bad thing I had done to my children.
Hmm.
And like see myself really clearly and with the eyes of love and compassion. And it was only after I fully forgave and released myself that we started a new level of co-created opportunity for healing. And then it was a couple years after that that my children, both different times on their own, told me when it came up in conversation, I feel like I'm fully healed from that now. And I was like, oh, wow, that's cool. That's awesome. I was hoping for that for you, but I didn't know if or when that would ever happen. And
Yeah.
so,
So beautiful.
because for years after I stopped doing some of those behaviors, I still hated myself for it. I still judged myself for it, and I wasn't releasing it, and my children weren't either. And I believe that me releasing it co-created a greater opportunity for them to also release it. I feel like while I was still holding on to it, especially while they were still children and I'm still like their role model, I feel like that was co-creating that we can't let this go. It can't be forgiven because that would be like saying it was okay and it was not okay, and it
Mhm.
wasn't okay. The ultimate forgiveness was not it was okay that happened. That's not what it is at all. Um, but I resisted forgiving myself because I was attached to the false story that would mean in some way saying that was okay, and it was not okay.
I love that, and I choose to believe that our children choose us at a soul level, and that
Mhm.
this transformation that you've gone through, the ones that I've gone through, the ones that, clients go through, are meant for our children to witness, to be a part of. Not They weren't meant to come in and have perfect parents. There's
Mhm.
never gonna be a perfect parent. There's no such thing. And that doesn't serve anybody anyways. That's not what we're up to.
Mhm.
So, I love that you can see your journey and their participation in it as a part of what's actually available.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And to bring this back to anger, not that I feel like we've left anger because it's intertwined with everything that we're talking about, but to specifically name something that I think is really important about anger and is connected to something you said earlier. Anger is often talked about as a secondary emotion. And one of the ways I think about anger is a protector.
Mhm.
So when I have experienced and embodied and expressed anger in the past in ways that I later regretted. And then I reflected back on it and tried to understand myself more deeply and with compassion. I would be able to excavate to deeper layers to discover the really important, valuable thing that I was trying to protect or that I thought I was protecting. The vulnerable part of me that felt like it needed that anger to protect it from something or someone or to protect me from it. So I can use anger to protect myself from my vulnerability when I don't want to feel and embody that vulnerability. I can use anger to mask it, to have a false sense of control or power. And that was something that I realized I was doing quite frequently. So when I feel myself getting angry now, there are a series of questions I ask myself. And one is, what am I protecting? What inside me feels like it needs to be protected? And it could be any number of things. And like you so beautifully named earlier, it could be protecting sadness. It could be protecting me from feeling sadness. It could be protecting me from feeling vulnerability. I could be externally defending a part of me that I feel like is being misunderstood or taken advantage of, or whatever story is going on for me around what's happening to me. And that anger is rising up in defense or, in reaction to an injustice or whatever the case may be. But I'll ask myself, what am I protecting? And then I'll invite myself, if I can identify it and acknowledge it, I'll invite myself to soften around the thing I'm protecting and like offer it love and empathy. And sometimes that's enough for me to transform the anger from like a violent anger, even if it's just violent with words, to like a grounded, strong, centered strength that I could still describe as anger. This is why I said at the opening of this show, I love anger. I love the different version of anger that I can experience now. It feels like a grounded source of strength to me now sometimes.
Mhm. I'd love to talk about passion as
Mm.
well, because that
Mhm.
feels very related to this dimension of anger that you're talking about.
Mhm.
And one of the things that you and I realized as we looked at passion with the same lens that we talked about. So, this idea of looking at it somatically, for example, how does it feel in the body? For
Mhm.
me, it's very similar to anger. And
Mhm.
I have heard it, and I'm curious for you actually if that's the case.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, I would say yes, with the caveat that I experience when I'm experiencing myself as feeling passion, the physical sensations are the same, but I experience them as pleasant. And then when I'm experiencing it as anger, especially the old version of anger that I was accustomed to, I'm experiencing them as very unpleasant. So if I'm feeling passionate about something or excited about something or like intensely drawn to something, I sometimes also have what I could describe as like tightness and pressure in my body, but it feels more like a coiled up spring ready to pounce on something that I'm super
Mhm.
excited about. And I have this energy that I want to put into it. And so the physical sensations are almost exactly the same for me. The difference is just whether I experience them as pleasant or unpleasant, like the boiling pot that I just want to keep the lid on, or like the, yeah, I'm excited, let's keep, like the volcano in the science, class where you're like, oh, look
Mhm.
at it go, it's amazing, so.
Yeah, and I think one of the powerful dimensions of anger, and I think it can also relate to this experience of passion, anger can actually fuel us forward to create change for ourselves or in the world that needs
Mhm.
you need that fire, whether it's feels like anger, whether it feels like passion. It can often be in its most sort of positive and powerful form a catalyst, a real catalyst for awareness and for action.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I love that fire, honoring it, listening to it. If people are struggling to know what they're passionate about, what they feel passionate about, if they've disconnected from their feeling of passion, and if they've also disconnected from their feeling of anger, I'll ask them, what makes you angry? What bothers you? And if they can name that, I'll say, okay, what bothers you about it? And it usually leads to what they care about and why they care about it. For me, passion is related to caring deeply about something. And I feel like the things that make me angry because there's something I care about, that I'm passionate about. And if I get clear on what that is and how I can care for that, then I can express and embody that in a way that feels life giving, life affirming, helpful.
I love that.
Mhm.
Anything else you want to say about anger or passion as we conclude this?
Um, just to thank everyone for listening and continuing to join us on this journey, and to invite questions. If you have questions about something that we talked about, I would invite you to email us, and I would be interested to hear questions. And we're talking about really complex, interesting things, in my opinion, and it's impossible for us to talk about them in their entirety. And if there's a question or something that came up for you as you were listening, I would love to hear it. So I think I'll end with thank you. And if you have any questions, email us.
That's Lauren at soulpathparenting.com or Amy at soulpathparenting.com. We're not hard to find.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for listening. I'm loving this journey through all the feels.
Me too.
And we will be back with you in a couple of weeks with yet another feeling. Thank you so
I'm
much.
so excited.